For nearly 60 years, the National Championship air races captivated audiences in Reno, Nevada. Now, the world's fastest motorsport is preparing for a new era in a new home. AbWeb contributor Ryan Ewing talked to the man leading the charge, Fred Telling, chairman and CEO of the Reno Air Racing Association.
Fred, why don't you start by talking about your title and your role at the Air Races group?
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon and giving me a chance to bring as many people up to date of everything that's going on as possible. I My involvement with the air races actually dates back to my days as a spectator in 1985, and along the way in the late 90s, I turned to my wife and said, "I'd like to do that." And she goes, "Do what?" I said, "Well, fly T6s and race them." Well, if she were here now, she'd basically say, "That's the dumbest idea I ever heard you say." And then promptly told me why. You're not ex-military, you're not a former crop duster, you don't have much tail wheel time. And I said, "Well, I'm still in my 40s, I can learn." She was very supportive throughout, thank God, in spite of her hesitancy. So I became actually and started racing 2001, but I qualified on 9/11 and 9/10, and we know what happened on 9/11. So in the end, 2002 was my first rookie year. I raced for a decade. Other people like Gene McNeely raced my plane for the next 5 or 6 years. Along the way, I became the T6 class president. In that role, I got to work with Mike Houghton and the other people who cheered it along the way. And in 16, they asked me if I'd be interested in joining the board. And I was delighted. I didn't realize they had a master plan, which was in midsummer 17, when we were doing the Pylon Racing School. The then chairman, John Agatha, said, "We're thinking about who should be the next chairman. I've finished 3 years. It's time to move on." And I said, "Well, how about so-and-so?" He said, "Well, he's already been chairman. How about another person?" He finally said, "Well, Fred, we had 5 votes for you. It'd be nice if we had your vote for yourself." That's how I became chairman in October of 17. I became CEO in February of 18 because Joey Scolari had stepped in as acting CEO. And that's a whole separate story about how that happened. But because I wasn't living in Reno, I basically said, "Look, I'll do the job as a non-salaried person. In the event we actually make money, I get a small bonus each year." Problem is, the 7 years I've been there, we've only made money in about 4 of them. So might even be just 3 of them. So I'm chairman, I'm CEO, and I couldn't do what I do without Tony Lagatetto, who's now the president and COO. He and I have highly complementary skill sets, and working together with him has been a great partnership. So that's what got me involved. And we never thought that relocating under my watch would happen. We always knew it might happen. I would have been happier if it hadn't happened on my watch. But the reality is, as a former racer and somebody who just believes this is an iconic event that belongs in America's future, we set out to find a new home. And I'm here now in Roswell, and I'm committed to seeing us, make this new seed plant firmly here and grow into the kind of event that I hope can exist here 10, 20, 30 years into the future.
Obviously, we're here to talk about this, but there's been a lot of news recently involving y'all. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the changes that have happened, and whether or not it's business as usual over there?
Well, it is fair to say it's anything, right, but business as usual, because we had the fortune, and it really was the good fortune, that after races, unlimited air racing was authorized to begin again in 1964. It began at Sky Ranch north of Reno, a dirt strip. I mean, conditions that by today's standards look enormously primitive. But that was the beginning. And then, much like here, Stead Air Force Base got decommissioned in 1966. And as a consequence, the races moved there. So for 59 years, we had 57 at Stead, 2 Briar at Sky Ranch. We had the chance to be in the same place over all this time. As you know, when it relaunched, it really began with unlimiteds, Formula One and biplanes, the only 3 racing classes there. And T6s were only added in 67, and they took a 1 year hiatus, and then it'd been continuous ever since. It wasn't until 2000, basically, that sport and jet got added to the group. And then 4 or 5 years ago, we added Stoll. So the first thing is, when I say it's not business as usual, when you think about how this effort began, it began small and it grew. And in our case, we're trying to take the whole Megillah, move it entirely in 1 year to a brand new location, um, lock, stock, and barrel. And quite honestly, if I had known a year and a half ago everything I now know about the challenges, would I have still done it? Would I recommend the board do it? Would I have asked the classes to do it? Yes, but we'd have been a lot smarter about it. We'd have known a lot more than we learned along the way. And so it's anything but business as usual. We're in a new home. We're a little bit surprised that two of the classes, in the end of the day, for their own, legitimate and serious reasons, have made a decision. They want to take a pause. They're both committed to being back in 2026. But, as I like to say, we're here to race. The state and the city have just done an enormous job helping to convert 80 acres of dirt and grass areas into parking, event space. Temporary grandstands will be up, pylon courses will be up. So the reality is, I'm not a very good poker player, but the reality is, use that adage, you got to play the hands you've been dealt. And so that's what we're doing. And we're excited. We've got T6 and jets, which can be up to 525 miles an hour, formula, biplane, and Stoll. It's going to be very exciting with military support and a lot of performers support during the day. So from our point of view, September 10th to 14th, we hope many of our fans, I know I'll lose some, we hope many of our fans come, because this is a relaunch year. And if you weren't like me, if you weren't old enough to be in Reno in 1964 to see the beginning, you have the chance of being here at the beginning of the relaunch of the next 50 years of flying and racing. So that's a one-time opportunity, and we hope everybody still comes.
Well, you made some pretty meaningful investments. I mean, just yourself, Fred. I was told that you bought a house there in Roswell, and one of your board members actually became the airport director. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that and the personal investments there?
Yeah, well, we've been very lucky. I'll speak first about Bobby Thompson, who's amazing. So, a couple of side stories about Bobby. For years, and she and I had known each other over a long period of time, not as well as we come to learn about each other these last 5 years. But I for years always said to Bobby, well, listen, young lady, what do you? And it would go off to whatever the question was. Well, finally, about a year ago, when we were talking, she looked at me and she goes, well, Fred, you do understand I'm actually 5 years older than you are. And I said, absolutely not. I thought all these years you were 5 years younger. Well, I'm 73. And the truth of the matter is, I keep saying, I hope when I get to her age, I have half the energy she has. She's just fabulous. So when we went through the process of all the site selections, and maybe your people will be interested in knowing why ultimately Roswell was the final pick. But when we went through all of this, the fact of the matter is, the community here appreciated Bobby's skills and background. She'd been in airport management for years. She'd been in the air race business. She'd been a racer herself. She managed air shows. And they turned to her initially after we made the announcement in May of last year that they'd like to hire her as a consultant to help with the transition. And she was delighted. And as the months went by, come October, they were so impressed with what she knew that they decided that they wanted to ask her to manage the search to find a new airport director for Roswell. And so she undertook that. And then they asked her if she'd serve as the interim head at the time. And she said yes, which from my point of view, and Gary Matter, our vice chairman, we're thrilled, because having somebody in that job who understood our challenges and understood airport management, this was a win-win. So after they interviewed all these candidates, as Bobby told me the story in the the mayor confirmed it. They decided of all the people they interviewed, who they really wanted was Bobby. So as of March 8th, if I have the date right, they offered a job full time. So she is, in fact, the director of the Roswell Air Center, and she's doing a fabulous job and turning it around. And if you know Bobby at all, there isn't a person I know that's more detail oriented and more community oriented, is a better manager and leader of people. It's just an honor, a pleasure to work with her. So having her here has been very important because it helps us with FAA relations, city negotiations at ongoing basis, work with the state. And then, not to get maudlin, but, you may or may not know, but my wife died September 2nd of last year. And in fact, I came to understand that if she had lived because she was immunocompromised, I wouldn't probably have been able to do all the things that I'm able to do for the races now. And so in December and January, I began to realize I needed to spend more and more time here. After the president's meeting, I started thinking, well, I really have to spend a couple of weeks of every month here. So in late February, I bought a house. And with the mayor's support, Bobby and I are both already Elks here. And I've returned to the Episcopal Church, and I found a church here. And this is a small community, but I grew up in a small community in upstate New York, and I just love it here. It's I've said this so far. I haven't met a person here I haven't enjoyed working with and talking to. And there are a few wags who look at me and say, well, you still haven't met everybody in Roswell. And I said, well, I still am highly optimistic. But it's been great. And the investment that the city and state's made, not just my personal investment, has really been instrumental.
So why don't you talk a little bit about some of that investment that they've made and involvement from local community members?
Well, as I started to say, we're taking like 80 acres of dirt on the northern area of the Roswell Air Center. And it's to the north of, looking west and to the north of the tower. And it's being converted into a brand new event space, all being chip sealed with the support from the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Cerna. We needed a new apron out in front, about 4,000 feet long and 100 feet wide. Partially because, as you know, we often get F-18s and other aircraft. So we needed an additional area that could support upwards of 60,000 pounds. We went and asked the Secretary of Transportation, and he basically said, well, I think we could do that as a training exercise. And I told him we needed up to 60,000 pounds support weight. And he looked at me and he said, well, Fred, you got to understand, we build roads out here. And our roads, we'll build them to 100,000 pounds. And I said, well, that's more than we need. And he goes, that's okay. We're going to build it to 100,000 pounds. We've got the ability, we've got the skills, we've got the people. Well, as time moved on, he wasn't able to do it as a training exercise. They've contracted out. And Secretary Cerna has been good enough to find the support to make that happen. When working with the FAA, they looked at our new apron and they said, you're going to connect two other locations here. That's looking like a taxiway to us. So it's about to be the brand new taxiway Charlie. So all of this investment is improving the facility to begin with, not just for our racing, but for operations. Pylon course, a third of it is on airport property. 2/3 of it are on the Brown Brothers Ranch property. We couldn't do this without the support of the Brown Brothers Ranch, which is owned fourth generation now in the Hollyfield family. And they are just wonderful, wonderful people. And so Pylon course is up and set up at this point. We've run into a lot of challenges. When we did PRS, we discovered there were, as people flew the course, there were more telephone wires and low power wires, some of which actually crossed course elements. And so we built a long list. Actually, Sport Class did a great job putting a list together of all the things they were concerned need to be addressed before they be comfortable racing. And T6 had some items, Formula and Biplane had some items. So the truth of the matter is, we entertained all of that and said, well, we got to do it. And right now we're getting it done. Xcel Energy came out and buried the power lines that used to go under the course, and any of the poles that no longer had lines on, they removed. Power lines that are parallel to some of the courses or one of the roads we're going to use as an emergency runway are all marked with marker balls. So I won't bore you with the long list of things to be done, but the truth of the matter is, we understand from the classes, we're here to make this course work for them. We picked Roswell because it was the safest location, flat land all around. Part of it, as the mayor likes to say, it's a floodplain, so they're not going to build on it. So reality is we had a tall order, but with the support of the state and the city, and I got to give a shout out to Mike Matthews, the city engineer, and he and his team are just doing a phenomenal job. And Xcel Energy working with us to make all this happen so we can race safely come this September 10th through 14th.
So, Fred, why don't you explain? I think maybe the community isn't fully aware of the relationship you all have with the classes and how that sort of works. So, I know there's sort of an independent contractor agreement. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, it's a good point. Actually, there really aren't any formal agreements. For 59 years, the relationships have operated, on a handshake. In reality, I like to use the phrase. I'm just stealing it. I've learned it from others. The Reno Air Racing Association, which is still our legal entity name, doing business in the National Championship Air Race, is a 501c3. And as we like to say, we build the sandbox so everybody else can come play in it. I use the phrase, and Greg's heard it many times in speeches, the reality is we do what we do, so you all, the racers, can do what you do. And our fans get to enjoy the product. So the reality is, simply put, is each of the classes are independent organizations, managed however they wish to govern themselves for the most part. Some of us are incorporated, some of us are LLCs, each one's independent. They almost all have their own small internal boards, and they represent the best interest of the class. Our obligation is to maintain accreditation to be able to race all these years up till now at Reno, so that the FAA permits us to be a race class organizer. And then each of the classes goes through their process to remain accredited, because the classes are the only ones who can sign off that a person is certified to race at the National Championship Air Races. As you know, historically, there were air racing in many other places. I mean, Homestead in Florida, out in Phoenix. But over the years, basically all of them fell prey to financial or development challenges. And for frankly, the last, 15 years or more, I'd have to go check the facts, we've been the only place where you could do air racing. So the long and the short of it is, it's been a handshake agreement between ourselves and the classes. One of the things that I instituted, and actually Bob Mills, so when I stepped in my role, I always thought one of the things that would be useful is to bring the class presidents together so we could talk together about challenges we face and issues. And that began at ICAST. The first year that I stepped in, I hosted a dinner with all the class presidents. A couple of them weren't going to be at ICAST, but they came over the hill to be there, to be part of the dinner. And out of that, actually, Bob Mills had a great suggestion. Bob said, I think it was after the second year, this sort of thing is really important. It helps us, talk amongst ourselves. Why don't we try and do it quarterly? So we actually started meeting quarterly with the class presidents on common issues. And, I've been delighted to see that, because it's important. This is a collaborative effort. It requires all of us to keep rowing our boats in the same direction to make it work. So that's how we're structured. That's how we've been structured. And once we had to do the relocation, we basically built a relocation site team. It was chaired by Terry Matter, and I was active on it, and each of the classes had representation on it. And so all 6 of the formal sites that filed a full response to our RFP were present in one form or another for each of the site evaluations. And I mean, I can talk a lot more about it, but at the end of the day, everybody agreed that the safest place to race was Roswell, notwithstanding all of the other challenge we have, which is sort of a lack of housing and cars and everything else. But it was the flattest course to race at. But there are 2 elements of safety that I think it's important people understand. And maybe all of our fans do, but the first was, we don't shirk from the sad reality that, frankly, one of my best friends and a man who has more time in my 51 Mustang than I do even, and as I like to say, he isn't flying it anymore, is Jimmy Leeward. And I was there when that accident happened in 2010 and 2011 rather. And the reality simply put was, a trim tap failure resulted in a major pitch up. He was out, according to NTSB, probably a 17G pitch up, and, ran out of energy and crashed in the front of the box seating area. We had done, rah-rah, I wasn't on the board then, had done a planning exercise the previous June, as we do every year. Every year we do a full scale one. And in that, they made some major decisions that in the event that there were such an accident, the state police agreed to close the southbound lane of the superhighway, shut off the Main Street connection through Stead. So of the people that were injured on site, I believe the numbers are roughly 58 people. Within just minutes over an hour, they were all in the hospital in Reno, in emergency rooms as appropriate and necessary. So we will not host, when we did the evaluation, safety men. Not only did the course have to be safe, but in the event that we have an accident like that again, and I pray God we do not, and it does not happen on my watch, but in the event we do, we had to have a site that was sufficient emergency services to support it. Well, the irony is this. 3 leading sites at the end were Roswell, Pueblo, Colorado, and Casper, Wyoming. Casper, Wyoming, and Wendover, which fell off earlier, shared one common characteristic. While the land and the facilities were great, if you had that accident in Wendover, you are more than 2 hours away to get to Salt Lake City. Even with helicopters, more than half of those patients would have died en route. And the same was true in Casper, Wyoming. The nearest place for a major trauma center was Cheyenne. So both of those got knocked out on that ground. Pueblo had the advantage that Colorado Springs was just to the north. So they had the advantage of both facilities for emergency and much better hotel and amenities for our fans. But the difficulty with Pueblo was twofold. When you fly over the course there, you were flying over land that was frankly filled with arroyos, ditches, hillocks. As a T6 racer, my personal opinion, but that wasn't the ruling decision, was if I lost an engine and had to set down in that would have been an unsurvivable event for me. In the end, the jet class agreed fairly rapidly. They did not want to race there. The unlimited class was willing, in the end with Dennis, but concerned, but would have preferred another location. So in the end, that's what ended up hurting the ability to make it work at Pueblo. There was one other major issue, was major high power lines that were on the course that would have had to been moved. The power company, to their credit, was willing to move them, but it couldn't have been done until 26, not 25. And so even if everybody were willing to race, we could not have raced Jet and Unlimited. We couldn't have raced any of the Super Sport Unlimited Jet course activity in 25. And at the time, our plan was to relaunch with everybody. And, obviously recent events have proven that didn't work out, regrettably. But we knew at Pueblo it would have been impossible. So those are the two reasons that, Wendover fell, Pueblo fell, and Casper fell. And what was left was safe land here, enormous support from the city and the state, emergency services that we need. And we figured, look, when this all began in 64, life was pretty primitive. Hopefully our fans, just like people, have grown Oshkosh, our fans hopefully will grow with us and bring this event back. But we're trying to move the whole event in 1 year. And it's been a huge undertaking. And I, know I'm sorry I've lost two of the classes, but we've got 4 closed course pylon classes and we've got Stoll, and we're here to race. And so all I can say is we're excited. If it weren't for all the effort that everybody else has put into it, we wouldn't be in the situation we are. And today, I'm under a month and this event will be over. So the next month for me is going to be hugely exciting. And the most exciting part when we get all done will be about 2 weeks later when we gather up and do all the lessons learned and figure out how we make it better for 26. So in any event, there's some things that I've heard from Greg Gibson, who's helped us enormously, both with our scholarship program and our marketing activity and communications. But so, I'm not, I regret for my age, I am not a Facebook person. I'm not on social media very much, but Greg has also mentioned to me that there were a number of people that had questions about how we're organized here. And so if I could spend a minute or two, we do know that there are challenges, but we've offset some of them with housing, with the fact that over 200 RV spaces with water and power have been built in this first year. And by next year, we're hoping to double that. So we're probably going to be pretty filled out there. We have a university here, the Eastern New Mexico University is based here, and they've said they're opening up their gym, their showers, their facilities, cafeteria even, and their performing arts center will probably in the evenings will be doing movies, sort of like Oshkosh, except instead of being outside for theater in the sky, we'll be inside in a beautiful performing arts center. But the university is providing staff support and facilities. It's we'll have shuttles from the hotels down to it. We probably got over 9,000 parking spaces. We actually have more than that, but I'll be surprised if we use up 9,000. And so we've got lots of elements in place for people to be able to come. Entertainment in the evening, both downtown in Roswell and in Artesia. So the community is looking forward to everybody being here, and I'm looking forward to serving as the MC and host for as many people as choose to come. And if there were a comment that I, would like to make on film, it would be to say, throughout the entire search process, not only did we have people from RARA as part of every trip, but we had people representing each of the classes as part of every visit. And, the fact of the matter is, one of my board members, Joey Scolari, who'd been chairman prior, he did remind me early on, he said, Fred, you realize that when this process is over, the easiest call you're going to have to make is the one that tells the person that they've been picked. But you're also the guy who has to make the 5 other calls that say they weren't picked. And I said, yeah, I know. It comes with the territory. And, Greg's exactly right. There was not one of those 6 locations where we were not impressed by the hospitality, the commitment, the interest of the community and many of the airport leadership that were there. And so if there's any fan out there who doesn't fully understand how much we were welcomed by each of these, we did a thorough evaluation of everything. And while it was difficult, the reality was we ended up picking, as we always have, our final choice on what would be the safest place to race if it goes smoothly, and in the event of an accident, what's the safest place to assure that everybody could be taken care of as they were in the 2011 event. Because as many people know, those survivors, I get a little emotional every time I raise this, but those survivors became our greatest supporters. They universally said, we do not want this accident and our injuries to be the reason that the national championship air races die. And to this day, when they come back, and we hope many of them come to Roswell, but when they come back to Reno, Tony Lagatetta and I always met with them. For the first 5 years, they actually were doing lunches with them every year. But even now, in 23, Tony and I met with all of them that were there. And in 24, the ones that came back for the air show, we did the same, even though it was a smaller crowd. And the reality is that kind of commitment, support, and dedication to the skill of air racing and the admiration that we all have for the pilots and the owners who undertake to do this. Because we've long said, look, I raced my T6 for years. I raced the P51. I didn't personally. I had my P51 raced by others. All of us understand, with the exception possibly of one or two people at the top, nobody makes money at air racing. We do it out of a love of competition, a love of our September family. And the truth is, we're addicted. I like to say, since addiction's a bad word, I used it in a different talk. We have a deeply held affliction to support aviation and air racing, and we love it. And I know that the sport and Unlimited people feel the same way. I know that once they resolve any of their other open issues and we can get back to them with our solutions, I'm looking forward to welcoming them back in 2026. And in the meantime, it's September 10th. I'll be out there every day, and I love it, and I want to welcome everybody who comes. So thank you much.